The room was already buzzing with energy. A martial arts seminar was underway in a packed training hall. Mirrors on the walls, mats on the floor, and dozens of disciplined fighters watching closely. At the center stood Steven Seagal, calm and composed, dressed simply, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades mastering his craft. This wasn't a movie set. This was real. Steven Seagal had been invited as a guest instructor, sharing principles of movement, balance, and control. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like someone who didn't need to prove anything. Among the crowd was a young black belt, highly trained, respected by his peers, and visibly confident. He had competed before. He had won before, and like many skilled fighters, he carried a question in his mind, not out of arrogance, but curiosity. Could the legend still do what people claimed? As the seminar paused for questions, the black belt stepped forward. He bowed respectfully, his posture perfect. "Mr. Seagal," he said politely, his voice steady, "would you be open to sparring with me? Just for fun." The room went silent. You could feel the air change, like everyone had leaned forward at the same time. Some people exchanged nervous glances. Others smiled, sensing something unforgettable was about to happen. Sparring Steven Seagal wasn't just a casual request. This was a challenge, subtle, respectful, but powerful. Cameras slowly came out. Phones were raised. Whispers rippled through the room. Did he really just ask that? This is about to get interesting. Is Seagal actually going to agree? Steven Seagal didn't respond immediately. He looked at the young man for a moment, not with anger, not with ego, but with quiet observation. His expression didn't change. No smile, no frown, just calm. The black belt stood confidently, waiting. He wasn't mocking, he wasn't provoking, but the question alone carried weight. Reputation was on the line. Experience versus youth, wisdom versus speed. Steven Seagal finally took a slow breath. The entire room held theirs. No one knew what he was going to say next, but everyone knew this moment would be talked about long after the seminar ended, because whatever Steven Seagal decided to do next would leave everyone speechless. The silence didn't last long, but it felt endless. As soon as the black belt's request sank in, murmurs spread across the room like a wave. Some people leaned forward, others shook their heads in disbelief. A few smiled, sensing history in the making. Steven Seagal still hadn't answered. He slowly scanned the room, not at the crowd, but at the energy, the excitement, the expectations. He understood something many people didn't. Moments like this weren't about winning or losing. They were about ego, control, and intention. The black belt stood patiently, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes focused but respectful. This wasn't a reckless challenge. This was confidence backed by years of training. One of the seminar assistants shifted nervously. Another whispered. This could get awkward. Steven Seagal finally spoke. "Why do you want to spar?" he asked calmly. The question caught the black belt slightly off guard. He paused, then answered honestly. "To test myself," he said. "And to learn." That answer changed the room. Steven nodded slowly. No judgment, no smile, just acknowledgement. Around them, students formed a loose circle without being told to. Everyone instinctively knew something important was unfolding. Phones were now clearly visible. Some people were already recording, sensing that whatever happened next wouldn't stay in this room. Steven Seagal adjusted his stance slightly, not into a fighting position, but into balance. His feet were light, his posture relaxed, almost casual. That made people uneasy, because fighters knew one thing: relaxation is dangerous. The black belt took a breath and bowed again, deeper this time. He respected what Steven represented, not just fame, but decades of discipline. Steven returned the bow. That simple gesture sent a ripple through the crowd. A few spectators whispered quietly, "Did you see that?" He accepted. This is actually happening. But Steven raised one finger gently. "Just for fun," he said, repeating the black belt's words. "No power, no ego, control only." The black belt nodded immediately. Of course. Still, tension hung in the air. Experience versus youth. Legend versus ambition. Some people doubted Steven. He was older now. Slower, they assumed. Others believed this was where myths became reality. The black belt rolled his shoulders once, loosening up. His confidence was visible, not cocky, but assured. He had trained for moments like this. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, looked almost uninterested, like a man standing at the edge of a quiet lake, not a battlefield. That contrast made the crowd uneasy. No referee stepped in. No rules were announced. This wasn't a tournament. This was something else. Just before they moved, Steven glanced at the black belt and said softly, "Remember, speed fades. Structure remains." The words didn't sound like a warning. They sounded like a lesson. The room fell completely silent. Every eye locked onto the two men standing at the center of the mat, one carrying hunger, the other carrying history. Before the first move happens, let me ask you, who do you think had the advantage at this moment, experience or youth? And comment below which country or city you're watching this from. I love seeing how global this community really is, because what happened next, no one in that room was prepared for. No one spoke. The air inside the training hall felt heavier now, as if every breath carried anticipation. The circle around the mat tightened slightly, students instinctively stepping closer, afraid to miss even a second of what was about to happen. Steven Seagal stood relaxed, hands low, shoulders loose. There was no dramatic stance, no raised guard, no visible aggression. To someone unfamiliar with combat, he almost looked unprepared. The black belt noticed it too. He adjusted his footing, grounding himself, eyes locked on Steven's centerline. Years of training kicked in. He reminded himself not to underestimate calmness, but confidence still pulsed through him. This was his moment. Steven spoke again, his voice quiet but clear. "Go slow," he said. "Feel before you force." The black belt nodded respectfully. He took one controlled step forward. Nothing happened. Another step. Still nothing. The silence grew uncomfortable. A few people in the crowd exchanged glances, unsure if this was part of the lesson or the calm before impact. Then, without warning, the black belt initiated. It wasn't reckless. It was sharp, fast, and clean. A probing movement designed to test reaction time, not to injure. His foot slid forward. His body followed, and his hand moved in with precision. But Steven Seagal didn't retreat. He didn't block. He shifted. Barely. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing. But fighters in the room felt it immediately. The angle changed. The energy redirected. The black belt's balance wavered for half a second. Just enough. The black belt pulled back quickly, surprised. He reset his stance, eyes narrowing. That wasn't supposed to happen. A ripple moved through the crowd. "Did you see that?" Someone whispered. "He didn't even touch him. How did he do that?" Steven remained exactly where he was, breathing steady, expression calm. The black belt circled now, more cautious. His confidence hadn't vanished, but it had been shaken. He knew he had felt something real, something intentional. He attacked again, this time faster. Steven stepped in, not back, not sideways. In. The distance disappeared in an instant. There was no clash, no loud impact. Steven's arm moved like water, guiding instead of stopping. The black belt suddenly felt his own momentum working against him. His body turned slightly, not enough to fall, but enough to lose control. He stumbled back, eyes wide. The room erupted in gasps. Steven released instantly, already stepping away. "No force," he said calmly. "You gave it to yourself." The black belt took a deep breath, trying to understand what had just happened. His heart rate climbed not from fear, but realization. This wasn't sparring the way he knew it. This was something deeper. He nodded slowly. "Again," he said. Steven inclined his head. This time, the black belt committed. His movement was decisive, fluid, the product of countless hours of drilling. Speed, timing, intent, everything aligned. And still, it wasn't enough. Steven's body seemed to disappear from the line of attack. His foot placement was perfect. His center stayed rooted while the black belt shifted forward. In one smooth motion, barely visible, Steven guided the arm, turned the shoulder, and disrupted the spine's alignment. Suddenly, the black belt was no longer standing strong. He wasn't thrown. He wasn't struck. He was simply off. He caught himself just before losing balance completely, stepping back hard, chest rising as he tried to process what had happened. The entire room was silent now. No whispers, no movement, only understanding. This wasn't about strength. This wasn't about speed. This was about control. Steven stepped back fully, creating space. "That's enough," he said gently. The black belt bowed deeply, much deeper than before. His confidence hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed. Engagement break. At this moment, be honest. Who do you think truly had the advantage here? Type master or student in the comments. The black belt looked up, a faint smile of humility on his face. I felt it, he admitted. Before I understood it, Steven nodded. That's how learning begins. The crowd finally exhaled, but they had no idea. The most powerful moment was still yet to come. The room was electric. Everyone's eyes were glued to the center of the mat, watching two figures who were about to turn a simple sparring session into a lesson nobody would forget. The young black belt had regained his composure. He straightened his back, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. His pride was still intact, but humility had begun to seep in. He had felt the invisible hand of Seagal's skill, something that no amount of speed or technique could replicate. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, appeared almost serene. He moved with the kind of relaxed confidence that only decades of experience could bring. His posture was subtle, yet every inch of him exuded balance and readiness. There was no tension, no theatrics, just perfect alignment, calm anticipation, and eyes that seemed to see through every intention. The black belt advanced again. This time, he was faster, sharper, more deliberate. His kicks were measured, his punches precise. He was testing, probing, seeking an opening. The audience leaned forward, hearts pounding. Even the most seasoned martial artists in the room were whispering, "Watch closely, this is rare." But Seagal didn't attack. He didn't block in the traditional sense. His body responded like water, flowing around the energy of the black belt's strikes. Every movement redirected force, rather than meeting it head-on. To the casual observer, it almost looked like the black belt was missing, but the experienced could sense the subtle manipulation, the effortless guidance, the mastery behind every step. The black belt launched a rapid sequence, a combination he had spent years perfecting, one that had brought him victories in countless tournaments. He struck, twisted, pivoted, and yet, with each motion, Seagal simply adjusted. A shoulder shifted, a hip rotated, a step redirected. The young fighter felt himself unbalanced repeatedly, never by brute force, but by the precise, invisible manipulation of his own momentum. The crowd gasped. Phones were recording everything now, but even the cameras couldn't capture the finesse. Some students whispered to each other, unable to believe their eyes. It's like he's moving before the movement even begins. The black belt tried to maintain aggression, but there was a noticeable hesitation creeping in. He was fast, strong, and skilled, yet the calm, unwavering presence of Seagal was unshakable. Every attempt to dominate was countered not by resistance, but by guidance. The lessons were being delivered silently, almost imperceptibly, but they were profound. At one point, the black belt lunged forward with a powerful spinning kick. The momentum of his own body carried him too far, but Seagal's hand barely moving intercepted the strike. Instead of striking back, Seagal redirected it, guiding the black belt off balance without touching him in a way that could harm. The young fighter stumbled back, chest heaving, eyes wide with surprise. The spectators were silent. No one had seen anything like this. Martial arts wasn't about brute strength here. It wasn't about speed. It was about awareness, control, and understanding the kind of mastery that could only come from decades of experience and absolute calm. The black belt bowed, not out of defeat, but respect. His confidence remained, but it was tempered by a profound realization. True skill wasn't about winning, it was about control over oneself and the situation. Steven Seagal nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the young fighter's effort. His eyes scanned the room, serene, commanding respect, without raising his voice or using force. The lesson was clear to everyone present. Power without control is nothing. Control without aggression is everything. The audience erupted into whispered awe and quiet applause. Students were already recording, sharing clips in disbelief. Some older martial artists shook their heads, muttering to each other, "He's teaching without teaching, showing without striking." At that moment, everyone realized they weren't just witnessing a sparring session. They were witnessing a masterclass in discipline, patience, and understanding the essence of martial arts. The black belt straightened his back once more, bowing deeply to Seagal. His expression was a mixture of humility and exhilaration. He had faced one of the greatest living masters and survived not because of strength or speed, but because the encounter had been carefully balanced, challenging, and enlightening. Seagal stepped back, relaxed, hands at his sides. He gave the faintest nod of acknowledgement. The room collectively exhaled. Everyone understood something fundamental had just happened, and while the crowd was amazed, the true lesson was already sinking in, a lesson that could not be measured in strikes or points, but in wisdom, restraint, and mastery over one's own energy. Before the sparring moves even escalate further, think about this. If you had to step onto the mat with a legend like Seagal, would you rely on speed, strength, or strategy? Type your answer in the comments and tell us which country or city you're watching from, because what was coming next was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the turning point that would leave the black belt and the audience completely speechless. The room was silent, every eye fixed on the two figures at the center of the mat. The black belt's chest heaved. His movements were sharper now, faster, more committed. He wasn't holding back anymore. This was the moment he had trained for, the culmination of every drill, every fight, every hour of sweat on the mat. He attacked with a flurry of strikes, spinning, pivoting, flowing from one technique to the next. His speed was impressive, his precision almost flawless. The crowd murmured in excitement. Students whispered, "This is incredible. He's giving it everything." But Steven Seagal was calm. Too calm. He moved as if time slowed around him. Every strike that came toward him seemed to curve, shift, or dissipate in the air before it reached him. His hands, feet, and body didn't collide with the attacks in a conventional way. They guided them, redirected them, absorbed them, almost without effort. To the untrained eye, it looked like the black belt was missing his targets. To the trained eye, it was obvious. Every motion was perfectly controlled and neutralized. The young fighter launched a spinning kick, the kind that could take down a less experienced opponent. The crowd gasped, thinking this was the moment. Steven Seagal didn't step back. He didn't block. He simply shifted his weight, redirecting the black belt's momentum. In one smooth, nearly invisible movement, the young martial artist stumbled forward, off balance, his own power turning against him. He caught himself just in time to avoid falling, but his eyes widened. For the first time, he realized he was facing a force he couldn't overpower. Not with strength, not with speed, only with understanding. The audience leaned forward, phones raised, recording every second. Some spectators whispered to each other in awe. "It's like he's reading every move before it happens. Is this even possible? He's not fighting, he's teaching." The black belt didn't stop. He attacked again, determined to regain control. His movements were deliberate, flawless, a test of skill, a test of spirit. Steven Seagal didn't counter in a conventional sense. His hands lightly touched, redirected, and guided. He used the black belt's own energy against him, creating openings where none existed. Every time the young fighter struck with confidence, Seagal absorbed it, redirected it, and left him slightly unbalanced. Not hurt, not humiliated, just off-center enough to show that skill alone isn't mastery. For the first time, the black belt's pride wavered. He was fast, strong, skilled, but none of it mattered. Against control, awareness, and wisdom earned through decades of disciplined practice. The spectators were completely silent. Even the whispers stopped. Every person in that room felt the weight of the lesson unfolding. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about mastery, the kind that doesn't need to strike to demonstrate power. Steven Seagal moved closer, his voice calm and deliberate. Strength is fleeting, speed is temporary, but control lasts a lifetime. The black belt froze, absorbing the words as much as the movements. He bowed, not out of defeat, but out of respect. His eyes met Seagal's, and in that moment, he understood. True martial arts was not about aggression or dominance. It was about understanding energy, timing, and restraint. The crowd erupted quietly, clapping and whispering in awe. Some students couldn't believe their eyes. Others recorded frantically, knowing that what they were witnessing was extraordinary. Steven Seagal stepped back fully, relaxed, breathing steadily. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. His lesson had been delivered subtle, precise, and unforgettable. The black belt straightened, chest rising with pride tempered by humility. He bowed again, deeply, acknowledging both the skill and the wisdom of the master before him. The spectators finally exhaled, phones lowered, cameras stopped recording, but the energy in the room remained electrifying. Everyone understood this wasn't a fight. This was a demonstration of what martial arts truly represented: discipline, awareness, respect, and mastery over oneself. Steven Seagal looked around at the audience and said softly, "Remember this. Power is meaningless without understanding. Force without control is dangerous. True mastery comes from patience, observation, and humility." The words hung in the air. Every student, instructor, and observer felt their impact. This was more than a sparring session. It was a lesson in life, disguised as martial arts. Before we continue, I want to ask you, if you were on that mat, watching this live, how would you react? Would you rely on strength, speed, or strategy? Type your answer in the comments, and tell me which city or country you're watching from. I want to see how global this story reaches. Because the moment that followed would not just impress the black belt, but leave the entire room speechless and cement Steven Seagal's mastery in the eyes of everyone present. The room was completely still. Not even a whisper broke the silence. The students, instructors, and spectators all stared at the center of the mat, where the young black belt now stood, chest heaving, sweat glistening, and eyes wide with awe. He had gone into this sparring session full of confidence. He had believed in his speed, his strength, and the countless hours of practice that had brought him victories. But now, standing in front of Steven Seagal, he understood something fundamental. Skill alone does not equal mastery. Steven Seagal stood motionless, calm, serene. His expression was unreadable, yet his presence commanded respect. He didn't raise his fists, didn't gloat, didn't even breathe heavily. The lesson had been delivered entirely through precision, patience, and subtle control. The black belt finally lowered his gaze, and then slowly bowed. It was a deep, sincere gesture, not of defeat, but of humility and recognition. I understand," the young fighter whispered, his voice trembling with respect. "I thought I was ready, but I see now. There's so much more to learn." Steven nodded slightly. "You're strong, skilled, and capable," he said softly, his voice carrying a calm authority. "But strength without awareness is dangerous. Speed without control is meaningless. True mastery comes from understanding yourself, your opponent, and the energy around you." The words sank in like a wave. The black belt exhaled deeply, absorbing the full weight of the experience. His pride remained, but it was tempered by insight. He realized that martial arts was not about proving dominance. It was about discipline, respect, and harmony. Around the room, spectators began to murmur. Some were recording, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Others were silent, too stunned to speak. Even the most seasoned martial artists shook their heads in awe. One student whispered, "He didn't even hit him, and yet he controlled everything." Another replied, "It's like watching a legend teach without speaking, guide without touching." Steven took a step forward and gestured to the black belt. "Remember," he said, "the most powerful strike is the one you don't throw. The strongest move is the one avoided through understanding." The young fighter nodded again, bowing deeply, a faint smile on his face. There was no embarrassment, only respect and enlightenment. The audience began to applaud quietly at first, then more loudly, until the hall was filled with a wave of appreciation. People weren't cheering for a knockout or a victory. They were cheering for the lesson, for the wisdom, and for the humility displayed in front of them. Phones were still recording. But it was no longer just about capturing action, it was about capturing a moment in martial arts history. Clips would be shared online, videos would go viral, and stories about this sparring session would circulate for years. Steven Seagal looked around the room, his eyes calm, yet penetrating. "Martial arts is not about proving who is stronger," he said. "It is about learning who you are, controlling yourself, and respecting everyone around you, even when you have the power to dominate." The black belt bowed one last time. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "I will never forget this lesson." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Cameras clicked, phones recorded. Everyone was trying to capture the energy, the emotion, and the lesson of the moment. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone's calm, wisdom, or skill humbled you completely? Type discipline in the comments if you've ever learned a lesson without even taking a hit. And tell me which city or country you're watching from. Let's see how far this story has traveled. Even as the applause died down, the lesson lingered in the room. Every student, from beginners to advanced black belts, felt it in their bones. Strength is fleeting, speed is temporary, but control and wisdom last a lifetime. The young black belt looked at Steven one final time. No words were needed, the respect was mutual. He had been humbled, inspired, and motivated all at once. Steven Seagal gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then stepped back, relaxing fully. The mat was silent again, but the energy in the room had changed forever. From that day on, everyone present knew they had witnessed more than a sparring match. They had witnessed a masterclass in patience, skill, humility, and respect, a demonstration that would stay with them for the rest of their martial arts journey. It wasn't about winning, it wasn't about losing. It was about learning, understanding, and growing the truest essence of martial arts. By the time the sparring session ended, the energy in the room was still vibrating. People were in awe, whispering, recording, replaying what had just happened in their minds. This was not just another martial arts demonstration. This was a moment that would be remembered for years to come. The young black belt stood in the center of the mat, chest rising and falling, sweat dripping from his forehead. He had gone in full of confidence, ready to test his skill, and had walked away with something far more valuable. A lesson in humility, patience, and true mastery. He bowed deeply one last time to Steven Seagal, who nodded in quiet acknowledgement. There was no celebration, no cheering for victory. The lesson itself was the triumph. Remember, Seagal said, his calm voice carrying through the hall. Martial arts is about controlling yourself, respecting others, and understanding energy. True strength is shown by restraint, not aggression. Phones still captured the moment, but now it wasn't about action. It was about a lesson, a demonstration of skill and wisdom that transcended fighting. The videos would be shared online, clips would go viral, and martial artists across the world would watch and reflect. Within hours, footage of the sparring session began appearing on social media. Views skyrocketed. Comments flooded in from around the globe. People were captivated not just by the skill displayed, but by the lesson of humility and respect. This is what martial arts should be about: respect and control, not winning or showing off. I learned more from this 2-minute video than years of practice. Steven Seagal is a master in every sense, not just in fighting, but in life. Even martial arts schools far away were replaying the clips in their classes. Instructors paused students mid-training to discuss what had just unfolded. The difference between speed and strategy, strength and control, aggression and awareness. The black belt, once confident in his physical skill, was now even more motivated. He realized that there was no endpoint in martial arts, no moment where one could claim complete mastery. Every day, every lesson, every encounter was an opportunity to grow, refine, and learn. Seagal didn't speak to the media that day. He didn't boast about what had happened. Instead, he let the lesson speak for itself. His calm demeanor, his control, and his humility became the focal point. The message was clear. Mastery isn't about showing force. It's about guiding energy, respecting others, and maintaining discipline. The sparring session inspired more than just martial artists. Athletes, performers, and even everyday people shared the story. The universal lesson resonated across professions and cultures. True strength comes not from domination, but from awareness, restraint, and wisdom. If you believe real strength comes from calm, discipline, and respect, type "respect" in the comments, and tell me which city or country you're watching from. Let's see how far this story has traveled. Social media exploded with shares, clips, and discussions. Millions of views poured in from every continent. People debated the techniques, dissected the movements, and more importantly, reflected on the philosophy behind martial arts. The black belt shared his own reflection online. I went in thinking this was about skill. I left realizing it's about understanding, patience, and respect. Thank you, Master Seagal, for teaching me the difference between speed and mastery. In the following weeks, the sparring session was referenced in seminars, martial arts magazines, and online forums. Trainers told students the story as a cautionary and inspirational lesson. No matter how skilled you are, humility and control are what make you truly powerful. Even years later, those who witnessed it in person said they could still feel the energy, the lesson, and the wisdom. The event wasn't about the black belt or Steven Seagal, it was about a moment of pure teaching, captured perfectly, and shared worldwide. And that, in the end, is the real legacy. A demonstration of martial arts that transcended competition, fame, and ego. A moment that reminded the world that discipline, humility, and respect are far more powerful than raw strength or speed. The crowd finally began to disperse, still talking quietly amongst themselves, still replaying moments in their heads. Phones were put away, but the lesson stayed in every fighter's mind, every student's heart, and every viewer online who had witnessed it. Steven Seagal walked out of the gym, calm and collected, leaving behind not just a black belt humbled, but a room, and soon, a world inspired. It was more than a sparring session. It was a masterclass in life. If you believe true strength comes from patience, discipline, and respect, type respect in the comments and share this story with someone who loves martial arts or learning from legends. Subscribe for more inspiring real-life lessons like this, because mastery isn't about winning, it's about growing.